Okay, I'm Jennifer Filzen, the author of We Aren't Going Back, A History of Women's Social Progress Over 200 Years. And I want to talk about what was life like in the for the ideal woman in the 1800s. Okay, so women were setting new standards. So did you know that there was a woman who practically invented women's magazines? Her name was Sarah Josepha Hale. She lived from 1788 to 1879. Picture this, it's the 1820s, and a newly widowed Sarah is responsible for supporting her family. Like us, she had to step up to the plate and take charge. So what did Sarah do? She broke barriers. In 1828, she became the editor of a magazine that eventually transformed into Godey's Ladies Magazine. This wasn't just any magazine, it was the first of its kind. A magazine edited by a woman for women. It's like being the first person to land on the moon, but in the publishing world. Now, here's where the story takes an ironic twist. Godey's Ladies Magazine heavily promoted the image of women staying in the domestic sphere. It's a bit like a famous chef promoting fast food. The same magazine was born from a woman's determination and grit, which set the ideal for middle and upper class women to stay at home. It's a fascinating story, isn't it? It reminds us how far we've come and how complex the journey has been. Now let's break it down by decade. Granted, there aren't as many surviving diaries and articles from this period, but we can make an educated guess at their daily lives. Starting off, let's look at the ideal women of the 1840s. Have you ever wondered how your great-great-grandma might have lived her life? Let me take you on a time-traveling journey that will blow your mind. Let's rewind to the 1840s in America. Picture this, a woman, let's call her Martha. She's the epitome of virtue. Her life is a whirlwind of domestic tasks, and she prioritizes her husband's and children's needs. Think of her as a 24/7 on-call nurse and chef with no weekends or holidays. They called them separate spheres. Sounds fancy, right? But it's like having a fish and a bird, each ruling their world, water and sky. Men were the birds, soaring high, while women were like our Martha, and they were the fish, deemed fit only for the domestic depths. But here's the twist. Not all women were content swimming in the same pond. There were rebels, women who dared to flap imaginary wings, challenging the status quo. This story might sound like a far-fetched alien concept in our modern times, but it's the stark reality of the 1840s. It's what our foremothers endured and fought against, paving the way for the freedom we enjoy today. So the next time you feel constrained, remember Martha and her contemporaries. Their resilience and courage helped shape the world we live in today. And remember, just like them, you too have the power to challenge norms and make a difference. So let's unveil the spirit of women in the gold rush era. Ever wondered what it was like to live in the 1850s? Imagine the gold rush from 1848 to 1855, the thrill of the West, and the adventurous women of this era. It's like a scene straight out of an exciting Wild West movie. If you think today's world is complex, let me tell you that the 1850s had its own challenges and expectations. The ideal woman was like a multitasking heroine, domestic, obedient, and submissive. She was the backbone of the family, managing the household while also taking care of her husband and children. She was a real-life Wonder Woman, minus the flashy costume and the invisible jet and the freedom. Society then was like a strict schoolmaster. It believed in something called separate spheres. So picture this, women and men were in their own bubbles, men as breadwinners and leaders, women as homemakers and caregivers. It was as if they were actors in a play, each having a specific role to perform. But remember, every rule has its exceptions. While the numbers might tell you that many women fit the stereotype, some challenged these norms. Like rebellious teenagers, they defied societal expectations, changing the narrative. It's fascinating to look back and see how far we've come and the strides women have made, right? Okay, let's look at the next decade. Women, massive social upheaval, and civil war in the 1860s. Did you know the Civil Rights Act of 1866 subtly paved the way for women's rights? This is a fascinating piece of history that's usually overlooked, so let me explain. Picture America in the 1860s. Ladies in corsets, taking care of the household, obedient to their husbands. They were expected to be well-mannered, musical, and the embodiment of the word ladylike. Now, throw in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. You'd think it had nothing to do with women, right? Well, let's delve deeper. The act granted citizenship to all people born in the U.S., including former slaves. It also gave all citizens the right to contract, sue, and inherit property. It didn't specifically mention women, but it created a domino effect. Imagine a line of dominoes, each one representing a group fighting for their rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 knocked down the first domino, paving the way for the others. It set a precedent, stressing that all citizens deserved equal treatment under the law, regardless of race. However, it wasn't a magic wand that instantly changed women's lives. It was more like planting a seed which needed time and nurturing to grow. Many women, especially those who were black or minorities, continued to face barriers in education, employment, and voting rights. The seed didn't fully blossom until the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the next time you think of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, remember the forgotten domino effect. It's an intriguing part of history that subtly yet significantly contributed to women's progress. So, next, let's discover the ideal women through the 1870s and 1890s. Ever wondered how societal expectations for women have changed over the decades? Let's take a time machine and return to the late 19th century. Picture the 1870s. The perfect woman was seen as a virtuous domestic goddess. She was the queen of her home, caring for her family like a bee guards its hive. Picture her as a beautiful painting, dressed modestly, with a small waist and feminine features. Conversations about household management and the arts flowed from her lips as easily as birdsong. Can you imagine that? Well, fast forward to the 1880s. Not much changed. The picture-perfect woman was still modest, virtuous, and domestic. She was expected to be a symphony of manners, able to sing and play a musical instrument. She was a Victorian-era Beyoncé, but with much more clothes on. But here's the twist. As we move towards the 1890s, defining an ideal woman becomes inappropriate and limiting. Just as a rainbow can't be confined to a single color, the qualities that make a woman unique can't be boxed into an ideal. This is a turning point, a significant shift in societal attitudes. It's fascinating, isn't it, how societal norms have evolved? It's like comparing an old black and white movie to the latest 3D blockbuster. The core might be the same, but the presentation is vastly different. So next time you encounter societal expectations, remember that they're as changeable as fashion trends. You're unique, just like everyone else. And then to add to it, let's talk about Hollywood. From hearth to Hollywood, the evolution of women's roles. So, ever wondered how women's roles have evolved from the 1800s to the 1900s? Let me take you on a time travel from the candlelight era to the spotlight's glare. Imagine women in the 1800s as beautiful roses confined to their gardens, tending to their family's needs. Their world was their home. Think of Elizabeth Bennet, the character from Pride and Prejudice, limited by societal expectations, yearning for a life beyond the confines of marriage and motherhood. In the book, this character learns to appreciate the difference between superficial goodness and actual goodness. Now fast forward to the 1900s. Women were no longer just roses in a garden, but becoming gardeners themselves. Remember the women's suffrage movement? That was a game changer. Like a tsunami, it swept away centuries of inequality, granting women the right to vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment, a leap from Pride and Prejudice to A Room of One's Own, where author Virginia Woolf, who lived from 1882 to 1941, uses metaphors to explore social injustices and comments on women's lack of free expression. As we move further into the 1900s, we see women getting diplomas, wearing suits, and entering the workforce. They weren't just making a home anymore. They were building empires. We now have women like Marie Curie in science and Amelia Earhart in aviation, breaking barriers and shattering glass ceilings. Women's roles in the U.S. experienced a seismic shift from the 1800s to the 1900s. From the Elizabeth Bennet character to real-life Polish-French scientist Marie Curie, they went from being roses in a garden to gardeners themselves. This is just a preview of what the 20th century will bring to women's social progress. So that concludes Chapter 2 of my book, We Aren't Going Back, A History of Women's Social Progress Over 200 Years. And next, we will go into Chapter 3, seeing how further along women got in the United States. Okay, hope to see you in the next video.